economics.
You mind if I?
Wow. No, I don't mind.
Okay.
So wherever their shipwrecks are, they say, oh, well, that's clearly a pied a terre for.
Yeah, so that's one
Interesting.
of the issues, and that's a concern, of course, for the US, for all the countries where the China is doing business. Of course, Korea, Japan is like major pass through their maritime ports. There's a lot of uncontested claims of lands in those areas. So yeah, it's a sphere that touches a lot of different subjects. So economics, politics, health and safety. Yeah, so it's big. It's a big issue, big,
Wow.
that's why there's so many more programs now.
Yeah. Now, what do you do for FEMA then? Are they involved in this as well? Are they the government agency that deals with all this?
Yeah, so indirectly in the course of big storm events. So for example, in Florida, there might be a shipwreck that may turn up in the middle of the ocean due to a hurricane. So I know that there was at least one example this last for Ian last year. And basically we just sort of help the other federal agencies know where this stuff is. Of course, state knows where it is, and they're usually the ones in charge of maintaining the databases, collecting the data on the ground. And we're usually just there in support of any damages to the cultural resource. That damages buildings or nearby structures.
And then are there environmental impact issues? My daughter is an environmental scientist, and so.
Oh, she is. These are all things I'm just passionate about. So I'm the one who's like digs the trash out, or the stuff out of the trash, and I'm like, you can recycle this.
So of course, this issue touches a lot of, so it reaches more into disaster archaeology and how FEMA documents it opposed to how the state documents, who's in charge of the different resources. So FEMA on the environmental side talks with US Fish and Wildlife, NOAA, Park Service, just to make sure that those resources are properly documented, know how badly they're damaged, and see if they can recover or not recover, but
Sometimes you can.
sometimes you can. It doesn't happen very often, but sometimes it can. And just protect the resource for future storm events.
So did Keegan just moved here too for FEMA job, or have you been here?
Years.
3 years?
And when did you move to this building? 3 years ago?
Yeah, 2021.
Wow.
That's when we moved in.
Yeah.
I'm usually deployed to the field, so I'm rarely here.
Where are you usually deployed? All over, wherever it's happening.
Yeah, Puerto Rico, Louisiana, Georgia. Where else have I been? Iowa. Yeah, I follow. He and I have never met actually before we moved into my building. Yeah, we've been in some of the same places.
That's amazing. Well, I've sailed in most of those places. We used to run our boat up and down from mostly Miami or Fort Lauderdale or Palm Beach up to Georgia, and then sailboat, and then further north. And then I've been to Puerto Rico a few times. I was living aboard and we did the south coast of Puerto Rico, Ponce and Mayaguez and all that. It's a cool island or country or whatever it is.
I'm just standing as I sit all day. I'm here just on this side. Super interested.
All right. Okay, so what about the soldiers or the remains of the ones that went down with the ship?
Yeah, so in maritime archaeology, there's classifications. So you're gonna have more of the private commercial vessels, which are regulated by different agencies. In the US, most wrecks are protected by some sort of law. Military shipwrecks in particular, and those owned by different governments, are protected by a special law called the Sunken Military Craft Act. So that's was made especially to be able to protect those types of heritage assets within US waters. And because the US has such a big influence around the world due to the First and Second World Wars, our shipwrecks, aircraft wrecks are all over the world. So while this wreck also protects those wrecks abroad, it doesn't have the legal ramifications of, let's say, international organization or person dives on a US shipwreck in foreign waters and they recover something, where the US law doesn't really apply to those entities because they're not US citizens. But we can work with those countries where those wrecks are and try to come to an agreement to protect the wreck and its resources.
Cool.
So there's a different agency that specializes specifically in recovering remains of MIA individuals, and that's DPAA, which is Defense POW Accounting Agency. And they're with the Army, so they go out and help recover persons missing in action. So that also includes shipwrecks. And because those wrecks are governed, shipwrecks are, well, get back a little bit, because the US Navy and the US Army have two different approaches to protecting their own sites. Navy wrecks have this law applied to them, so all wrecks that are underwater are protected. US Army wrecks are a little bit different. They can apply the same law to their shipwrecks, just at this time, they don't really have the capacity or the people to specialize on curating those resources. So they mostly focus on what's on land, and the Navy helps on any particular sensitive issues that happen to be in waters.
What about Vietnam? Are there POWs that are both on land and in the ocean there?
Yeah, so DPAA mostly has projects. I mean, they have projects all over the world. They have quite a few in China still. They have some in Vietnam, quite a few in Vietnam. And on their website, I mean, they always update who they've recovered, how they've informed the family members, how they've identified them. So that's a particularly interesting subject to delve into as well.
So
have any of you here been to the Steamboat Arabia?
Yeah.
I gotta go.
Keegan has. I know, I've lived here 14 years and I haven't gone, but I've been wanting to because they're talking about moving it or something.
Kind of a bigger building.
Is it pretty cool though?
Yeah, it's a well-preserved 19th century steamboat wreck, Agustin. Years.
Yeah.
So it's a fully loaded cargo ship, and
Wow.
everything kind of preserved really well.
Gotta do it.
I recommend a field trip.
There you go. We can have
Our first field trip.
Excellent, excellent. And you can be the docent then, right? I wish Brian were here. I can't remember the name of it, but there's a famous Swedish battleship that sunk on its maiden voyage. Have you heard that story?
That's the Vasa.
Yeah.
I worked on that one a little bit.
Wow.
So when I was doing some work in Sweden, that's one of the ships I got to do a little bit of training on.
That's amazing. Brian has actually been to that museum and lent me his book that he bought there. So
Yeah, it's a great museum. It's one of my favorite intact shipwreck archaeological displays I've ever been to.
It's unbelievable. Do you know the story, Caroline?
No, huh?
So
I know he's got, you know, when I was at his, I went to his place once and he has that map and he
yeah,
shows all the little pins where he's been to, but we didn't talk about many.
so Sweden, my mother's parents came over from Sweden, so I'm half Swedish.
Oh,
Um,
kind of further
but,
that.
but anyway, whoops, there you go. But the story goes in the 1600s, I believe, Sweden was a huge maritime power. And so they built this double-decker warship, and everybody turned out. It sailed out of the harbor, the wind hit it, and it sunk on its maiden voyage.
Oh,
And it was there for centuries, and then they've recovered it, they've restored it, and it's in this museum in Sweden. And both Brian and Augustin have been there,
wow.
so it's pretty cool.
Yeah, and basically what I want to talk about is just so underwater archaeology, maritime archaeology is the study of basically man's impact on the sea and anything connected to the sea. So it could be economics, how the shipfaring developed economically, the countries that were using those waters, culturally, the movement of people, migration. So it can tell a lot of different types of stories.
That's way cool. Like, how did you get interested in it?
How did I get interested in it?
I was thinking that thing. I was wondering that same thing.
Oh yeah, so in undergrad, I had been taking aerospace engineering classes, and eventually I got into an archaeology class. I ended up liking that a little bit more. So eventually I did a project involving the Viking shipwreck or Viking site that's in Lennox Meadows out in Canada, and try to come up with a theoretical model of why they didn't last in the Americas for very long. And eventually that's what got me interested in the underwater archaeology, and eventually found that program in Denmark where I started studying Viking culture. So I'm like, oh, this is a great opportunity to go investigate that a little bit more. And then eventually I fused my aerospace engineering background with the archaeology and started studying submerged aircraft wrecks for the Navy.
We're in the presence of smarty pants.
No, this is awesome. This is great.
Yeah, yeah.
So tell us about some aircraft you've investigated.
Some aircraft, yeah. So my first aircraft that I investigated was in Papua New Guinea. That's what I did my thesis on. Basically, I just researched the different ways in which aircraft archaeology had evolved over time, and where the state of our study was, and basically compared a few different wreck sites. And I would focus specifically on this US Army aircraft, which crashed out in Papua New Guinea, and figured out what was going on with it, identified the actual plane using the ID pictures that I found online from divers that were, I mean, they routinely go to it as a tourist area, but it's a pretty difficult wreck site to get to because it's very deep. So it's only really technical divers are able to dive on it, and not for very long. So I wanted to see how they were diving on it, what type of steps they were taking to keep the resource intact, and what US Navy law could do to help promote the preservation of that wreck.
Were there crew members lost on the wreck then?
On this one, there was not, so this one didn't really have any issues with human remains, but there are quite a few. Many aircraft are
Thank you.
their pilots. And especially in the South Pacific, it's very deep waters,
Yeah,
so they remain on board. And really the only way that human remains can remain in these wrecks is if they're buried. So if the wreck is buried, there's a potential for human remains to still be intact. If it's exposed to the water, there's a number of different critters that'll just dissolve the bones, and pressure is also another factor. The deeper the wrecks are, the bone density gets worn away a lot faster.
huh.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But some of the POWs, they actually have recovered remains and returned them to family members and for burial in the States. Or...
So for underwater wrecks, it's a bit tricky. For the most part, the Navy has a custom to for burial at sea. So it's customary that if you went down with your ship or aircraft, that you remain where you land, essentially. Of course, DPA's mission is a little bit contrary to that, because their goal is to recover as many bodies from foreign waters as they can, as part of their mission and their strategic goals with the American people. So we often collaborate a lot with DPA, or the Navy does, to make sure that the wrecks that they do are interested in recovering human remains, because there's evidence that there's remains in them, that it's being done according to a specific set of archaeological standards that's scientific, and it's not a rushed process where the goal is to recover as much as you can before the wreck is destroyed. So
I wonder if they have, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, sorry. I was just curious if they would ever consult with the families. You know, like if one of the losses you have to recover on, but the family is fine to have them be buried at sea, would they go with the family's wishes? Do you know?
A number of them where I was particularly involved, I identified a few, or yeah, 2 aircrafts out that crashed off of Florida that this group was searching for. So I went on the boat with them to try to help them find these particular Navy vessels, Navy aircraft. And the family, when we released it to the media, they reached out and says, "Oh, that's our family member's aircraft," and he went down with it. But they weren't really interested in recovering the human remains, because they were brought up with that tradition as well. But then you have the other families that really do want their family members back. So it takes a lot of information with like State Department, especially if it's in foreign waters, and then the Navy side, to make sure that it's being done appropriately. And our concern is also the wreck itself, because that's one of our mandated objects to preserve. The Army doesn't necessarily have that same mandate, because there's this particularly just for the human remains.
What about that billionaire who sub imploded on the way down Titanic not too long ago? Is there anything left of them, or are they pretty much nothing?
So that's that's a different side of archaeology as well, right? So our technology has come to the point where now we have the capability of going a lot deeper. So you're having a number of individuals with lots of money creating these subs for tourism. And they want to be able to visit these sites to visit as a tourist area. So one of the ways that they sell their subs to companies, to military, or to whoever they want, is showcasing them through tourism. For that sub in particular, there's very likely not going to be anything left because of the depth that they were at. And the issues that sub had, it wasn't really spec'd for that type of depth for as long as they were planning to be down there, so it imploded.
Yeah.
I remember reading stuff that's saying, well, you know, if they have this many more days or hours until they run out of air. And I was just on like pins and needles because all I could think about is how horrifying that would be to know that, okay, you're just going to run out of air eventually. So it was maybe a blessing in disguise.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, and then you have other groups who I've worked with as well, who are down there that want to do, I mean, there's more like philanthropy, and their other goal is like research, so they want to prove that we could go to these depths. So one of the ways that they've done it in the past recent years is coming to the Navy and saying, we would like to be able to find these wrecks. So for example, the Indianapolis, which was found a few years ago, made major news. So I sort of helped with figuring out where the wreck was and documenting the site through photogrammetry and the remote sensing data that they had on board. So basically, they were able to, I mean, we've worked with them to figure out the best way to document the wrecks at those depths. What type of imagery is going to be the best, how to go about doing the data gathering, collecting the data, and using the video and the pictures to create a digital map of the wreck as it is, so that we can know exactly what matches with the historical documents, which, if any survived or other ships were nearby, and noted what happened to the wreck, how it broke apart. And it also tells you, by examining the wreck, it also tells you what systems or what parts of the ships would help with the construction of future ships. I mean, being able to tell what section of the ship fell off first is going to be able to tell engineers, well, let's take a look at this, what happened here, what went wrong, and how we're able to fix that on any future models of these ships.
Wow. How deep is that one in Indianapolis?
That one's very deep. I think it's, I don't know off the top of my head.
Yeah, but
But it's more than 3,000.
yeah.
Oh, no, that one's 6,000 feet, I believe.
Oh, wow. What's the Titanic?
2,000.
Yeah,
2.
1,000.
Okay.
So I forget the backstory on the Indianapolis, did they transport the nuclear weapons, the first nuclear bombs on it, and they somehow wouldn't come and save them when it was sinking? The Navy didn't, I forget, but.
Were they afraid?
Oh, that one was particularly special mission because they were carrying these materials on board. They didn't want anyone to know, so they had very small escort, and they were traveling in a specific route, trying to avoid Japanese Navy. So limited communications, limited escort capabilities. So they really had no way of being able to call for help immediately, and yeah, it was a big big issue.
Yeah, I also remember a story about a nuclear bomber dropped a nuke off of North Carolina in the water several years ago. Is that, no?
I haven't heard about that.
All right.
The Navy had a number of bases on the East Coast, so they tested a number of things on their aircrafts and on their ships. So, for example, for aircraft carriers, they had the base in Pensacola where they tested a few of them. Lake Michigan was the place where they tested the majority. And then in California, they had another group of where they trained some of them.
And they drop these bombs in the ocean? Is that what you're saying?
On oceans or in small islands. So in New York, they had, in Martha's Vineyard, there's a bomb testing site in one of the small peninsulas.
Jeez.
That research on as well.
I've been to Vieques, and it's an island off of Puerto Rico, and half of it was a bombing test range for years. They finally stopped it, but there's full of unexploded ordnances, and you don't want to go walk around there.
No.
But it's beautiful anyway. Well, we've got about just a little over 3 minutes left. I've been trying to upgrade the Zoom, but any last comments, anybody?
I got a question actually. So you mentioned the Indianapolis, it's such a deep depth, you know, the pressure and the darkness probably would prevent a visual sighting, you know, when we're walking around outside nowadays, LiDAR, or even just, you know, walking around, we can see things. So when it comes to deep ocean stuff, what are the kind of tools that we can use to image? Is it sound scans and sonar, or what are the kind of tools or at your disposal?
Yeah, so we were able to deploy multiple remote sensing, multi-beam as well. And then the video and photographs that they were able to take were also very useful because the water is very clear for the most part.
Sure, I guess once you put a light down there.
Yeah, so even the planes have some of the original paint still there, and they shone a light on it. And
Wow.
to clearly see, like, if the plane was completely new.
That's amazing, and that.
One of the problems with recovering, because there's a few individuals that want to recover aircrafts to put in museums from those wrecks, and of course, there's capability isn't really there, and the things that they propose don't really make sense in the way that they want to lift them. And we've tested materials from other like wreck sites, aircraft wreck sites. The metal at that depth, when it comes up from pressure, it starts to disintegrate because something weird happens with the metals down there that the pressure makes them like a lot weaker. Even if the plane looks completely new, the metal itself isn't in the same condition.
Huh.
Wow.
Get some chemistry there even.
Yeah. Well, this was fascinating. Thanks for putting
Thank
it
you so
together.
much. Really appreciate
I
it.
should have walked over there, but I was so comfy under my warmer and
No problem.
Breathe outside.
Yeah. So, all
well,
right.
also I will, if you guys are really interested, I'll organize a little trip to the museum,
That would be great.
that Steamboat Arabia, because
I-
some of the others might be interested.
Yes, I definitely would. That'd be
You
great.
mentioned it to the manager.
Do we need to do it on a Saturday or Sunday, Agustin, for your work schedule?
Or the
Yeah.
weekend's better, you guys.
Probably better.
Yeah.
Weekends are better. Okay.
They're leveling it down. Yeah, we normally work Monday through Friday.
So.
It doesn't count as research for your job or anything.
I mean, it can.
Actually, maybe.
There you go. All right, well, we have less than a minute, so everybody,
Okay.
you so much. We'll,
All right.
we'll do it again and
Thanks
post,
for joining.
I'll post
Yes.
to the group.
Stay warm.
Yeah, man.
Okay.
Charlie is napping. She's been.
There. Yeah. Hi,
Better to go.
Charlie.
All right, well, thanks again.
Okay.
See ya.
Yep. Bye, guys. Have a good
Bye.
weekend.
That was great. Thank you.